And you had an encounter you'd like to hear narrated on this channel? Well, if so, send me an email with all the details. You can email me at contact@buckeyebigfoot.com. Hello there, everyone, and welcome to Buckeye Bigfoot. Now, if you haven't already, I would suggest that you get your snackage ready. We're going for a nice long ride tonight, somewhere northeast of Kamloops up in British Columbia, Canada. Are you ready? I know I am. So get your booty in the saddle. Let's head on down. We got a long way to go tonight to get to Sasquatch Valley. Let's go. I don't think I was born to be a skeptic, but I became that because, well, I had older siblings who liked to pull pranks and tell me stories and get me to believe them just to laugh at me because I was so gullible. So now I am a skeptic through and through. Well, I was anyway, until the episode I'm about to tell you about. I grew up having just a few really good friends. I considered Scott one of my two closest friends in my whole life. We are still good friends to this day. Now, growing up, Scott's family was a little bit better off than mine was, but none of us knew just how much better off until Scott's father passed, leaving Scott and his three siblings an eye-popping amount of money. Now, none of them knew that their dad had been investing heavily since the early 1980s, before he even got married. This is only slightly relevant because when they all got that money, well, you know how it is in a small town. Word gets around fast, even when you try to keep it quiet. And in no time at all, one of the cheerleader types that we had gone to school with suddenly found Scott oh so charming and interesting. I don't mean to sound mean about Scott, but he was just like me. We were never the kind of guys that got the attention from the cheerleader types, you know? But all she did was bat her eyes at him, and the next thing you know, they were married. The marriage was brief, and the ending was absolutely brutal, leaving Scott on very unsure footing in his life. He felt less sure of himself than he ever had. I really hated what she did to him, but she did him bad. So now you know. Now, not long after that divorce was final, Scott and I made plans to cut loose and go up to that cabin that his family had owned. The cabin had been left to the siblings equally, and they treated it a little bit like their own private timeshare, with everyone just calling all the other people in the family and making sure no one else was going to be up there when they wanted to go up there. Now, this cabin is northeast out of Kamloops by about 50 miles, give or take. I'm sorry, but I can't be any more specific than that. Now, we headed up late on a September day. We got there in the afternoon. It was a fine, clear, beautiful day. Now, we have to park a little bit away from the cabin, which I knew. I had been up there twice before when we were kids, tagging along on family weeks up there. On the way up there, Scott tells me that his sister and brother-in-law had been up there over the summer, and they swore that something had been messing around at the cabin, or maybe a someone, and that we should be careful. They said it was taking stuff, and it would scare them and the kids at night, especially if they went out to the outhouse. They warned us not to go out at night if we didn't have to. Scott and I had a good laugh over it, thinking that his sister was being oh so dramatic, which she was known to do. The thing is, neither her nor her husband are what you would call the outdoorsy type. They would scream if they saw a spider, both of them, and run. So I didn't put too much stock in what she said, and neither did Scott. We got there. We got everything inside the cabin, and we settled in for the night. But it wasn't but maybe an hour after dark. We're inside, and we suddenly hear some strange yelling outside. We have our hunting rifles, so we got those and walked outside to have a listen. Neither of us had a clue as to what it might be out there, but we were curious. The yells were not far off, so we thought we might have a chance to see what it was. I walked back in the cabin, got the other camp lantern, and together we walked further out from the cabin. Scott was using a strong flashlight, which put out a strong beam for a good distance. When he hit that flashlight up on high, to to where we could look deep into the trees, the yells suddenly stopped. We stood out there in the semi-darkness for a while, but not another yell came. We go inside and we close everything up for the night as usual. And not an hour later, we hear the worst racket outside. We were both up off our bunks and putting on our shoes in a second. I didn't make out what it was at first when I woke up, but half a second later, I knew what it was. We were hearing the car alarm on Scott's SUV. When we had finished unloading everything when we got there, I remember I poked fun at Scott for setting the alarm. I remember saying, "Oh, really? Like someone's going to steal it all the way out here?" Scott laughed too, then he shrugged and he said, "Well, you don't know. Maybe some bears or some moose want to take a drive into town for some beers." We both laughed, and then Scott said he didn't know why he did it. He just hit the fob out of habit. I could understand that. Then Scott turned around to disarm the alarm, to make a point to me, I guess, that he didn't care if it was alarmed or not. But we were already too far away from the car. He just said forget it. So the car stayed alarmed. Well, we forgot about it. Well, something had done something to set that alarm off. I looked at Scott and he said, "It's probably a moose or a bear rubbing its big old butt on the car or something." My internal alarm from being awakened was now shut off. I thought, yeah, that made sense. But he was going to have to walk out there to shut that alarm off. We were just too far away to do it from where we were. So we got our shoes on, got our rifles again, and we each had some bear spray on us. We figured that whatever it was would have already been scared off by the alarm, but just in case, we were ready. We get out there, and we stop when we have the flashlight on the SUV. It had been scooted. The nose of the car was not pointing where Scott had parked it. This just confirmed for us that it must have been a bear or a moose or something really big and strong. I mean, what else could scoot a car on a pivot sideways? We sweep the flashlights around, and we didn't see the culprit, so we guessed they had already split the area as soon as the alarm started. Scott shut the alarm off, and we did a quick walk around the SUV and didn't see any obvious damage, so we started walking back to the cabin. Later, Scott told me that he was feeling it too, but at the time I had the strongest urge to turn around. All the way, I felt like we were being closely followed. The next day, we went back to the car to check to see if we could see something that would maybe tell us what did it, something we couldn't see that night before in the darkness with just flashlights. But we couldn't find anything definitive. The area to park had gravel poured there at one time, but now it was all packed down solid into the dirt. Beyond that, there was just forest earth that didn't show any prints that we could make out. We just chalked it up to some curious big animal. And that might really have been all it was. It might not have been a Sasquatch. But personally, I think it was. This cabin is a very rustic cabin. There's no electricity, no running water, and there's only an outhouse for human needs. Now, I don't mind telling you, I am not a fan of going out there at night. I really do try to do all of my business long before nightfall. But sometimes it doesn't work, and you have to answer the call in the middle of the night, and it's just not one of those that you can close up in a bottle, if you catch my drift. It was sometime just past 11 p.m., I think it was. We were still sitting up, playing cards and talking, and I realized I had no choice. I had to go to the outhouse. I told Scott, and he said to be careful of bears. That was only just a half-hearted joke that had been said at the cabin as far back as when we were kids. Actually, when we were kids, we had to wake one of the adults to go to the outhouse after dark. We weren't allowed to go alone because of the threat of walking into an animal was a very real thing. I'm sitting in the outhouse doing my business, and I hear a very high-pitched whistle. It held the single note for a long time. I just figured it was Scott being silly, so I tried to whistle right back. But I can't whistle worth a darn. I tried, and I started giggling and laughing. Then I tried again and did the only kind of whistle that I could ever really do. I don't know what to call it, but it's the whistle that I learned when I played sports in school. It's where I put my 2 little fingers on either side of my mouth and press up against my teeth. It's a loud, sharp whistle. It's the kind you can hear across a parking lot. My mother hated it, said it hurted her ears. Well, I did that whistle because, well, that's all I could do. I let 2 or 3 of my whistles out, and I thought, well, that will shut Scott up. I didn't hear that whistle anymore. So I'm finishing up my business, and I suddenly feel a powerful hit to the side of the outhouse. It felt like the whole building was rocked. I braced myself with the arms to either side of the little wooden house, and I waited, holding my breath. That wasn't Scott that did that. That was way too much force, and it wasn't the kind of thing that Scott would do anyway. The door to the outhouse had a rectangle up near the top that was cut out. It was a vertical cut and was on the edge where the door met the frame. It was placed in such a way that most of us used it as a way to pull the door open from the outside. Just put your hand through with the palm to the door, cup your fingers, and you could pull it open. If no one was in there, it would be unlatched, so you could open it. I hope you can picture how that worked. Well, I had walked out there with the flashlight. It was sitting at my feet. I heard the door jiggle against the inside latch. I picked up the flashlight, turned it on, and I was expecting to see a bear paw at the very worst. But I saw a hand with hair on the back of its fingers. The palm and the majority of the fingers that I saw were leathery and skin-like covered. But I did not see the thumb. I did see the 4 fingers, however. I saw the fingernails on those fingers. The fur was a dark brown, and the leathery skin I saw was a lighter chestnut, lighter brown color. The fingernails, they looked just like ours. I can't find any words to give you an idea of what was in my head. I know I started yelling. I didn't know what else to do. In my hurry to get out there, I had broken one of the big rules. That is, you take a gun with you, or at least some bear spray. The outhouse wasn't far from the cabin, but you could never be sure what you were going to run into out there, and it just wasn't worth chancing it. I'm yelling, and I remember the exact moment I saw the fingers curl, like they were getting a good grip on the door. I just knew it was going to rip that door right off. And it did. Partway, anyway. The boards that had been pieced together to make the door came apart, leaving only the upper portion open. In that open area, I saw a wide wall of that dark brown fur in the flashlight's light. Then I saw a face as it bent down to look in at me. It was horrifying. I saw it for just that second, and then the face retreated from the bright light. But what I saw has stayed with me forever. Its face was like a human's, but yet not like a human's. I still struggle with the right words to describe it. It had hair on its face, but the hair was not very thick. Its eyes were set so deep in its face, and it had thin fur on the eyelids. I saw that when it shut its eyes against the light. Its nose was like ours, but again not like ours. It was more rounded and bubble-like, with large nostrils. My only memory of its lips were thin lines drawn wide on its face. Now there's another thing about the rectangle for where the hand goes to open that door. It's set pretty far up, so people can't look in at you very easily. As kids, there was always a piece of cord that was nailed to the inside of the door that hung down on the outside, so we could use that to pull the door open. But this thing had to hunch down to look in at me. That meant it was in the 7 to 8 feet tall range, because the rectangle was just below the 6-foot mark. So I'm on the outhouse seat, screaming for all it's worth, and it's looking in at me. I suddenly hear Scott yelling too, Then I see another flashlight outside from between the wood slats and the bit of broken door. I still had the flashlight on, and I pointed it at the door opening. I saw the mass of dark brown turn. Now I saw Scott's flashlight, like a bright beacon behind. I heard Scott let out a curse word. Then I heard the bolt on his rifle being ripped back and forth. At the same time he yelled something that I took to say, "Get down." Well, I really couldn't get down exactly. I didn't have enough room. But all I could do was what I did, which was bend over and put my head between my knees. As we used to joke in the military, I put my head between my legs to kiss my you-know-what goodbye. But I remember thinking, I didn't want to die on an outhouse bench. I heard the crack of the rifle. Immediately there was a scream of pain. It was high-pitched and ear-splitting. There were footsteps suddenly pounding away. In all of that I heard the bolt of the rifle being thrown again, then another crack as he fired. The screaming faltered and stopped. Then all I could hear was the sound of something crashing through everything in its path as it ran away. I guess I was still stunned, or maybe in some real shock, because I was still sitting there with my pants around my ankles when Scott came up to the broken door and looked in at me, shining the flashlight in my eyes. But I remember seeing only the tops of my boots. My head was still between my knees. I finally looked up, and we were both saying and yelling things to each other. But what I remember is him telling me to hurry up. So I did. I got up, and I pulled my pants up and clutched them at my waist, not bothering with zipper or button, and we ran to the cabin. Once inside, we locked everything up as tightly as we could. But this was not a cabin built to withstand a siege, not like the old ones that were made from whole timber logs. We sat there in the middle of the main room, just the one lamp on low between us. We talked quietly, and finally we began to really talk about what had just happened. There were a couple of main things we discussed in depth. We both knew we had seen a Sasquatch out there. There was no question about that, no doubt at all. And we also know that Scott landed at least one good shot on its right shoulder, and he thinks he hit it again the second time, but he wouldn't swear on his life to it. We had heard some old stories, and we vaguely recalled one about a bunch of Sasquatches getting angry when one of them got shot, and then they attacked the cabin all night long. We weren't on the up and up, so to speak, with the history of Sasquatches, so our knowledge was vague and scattered. But somewhere in our history, we had both heard about that incident of some cabin attack that lasted all night. And that's what we waited for all night long. But no attack came. The first couple of hours inside were very tense and anxious. As more time went by and nothing happened, we began to get a little more calm. By morning, we had a plan, and the plan was we were getting out of there. Now, it was really closer to mid-morning before we actually cracked the door open. We took a look to make sure the coast was clear, and then we began to head to the car with our things. We were not staying another night. We made it out with nothing else happening. Now, when we got home, Scott did tell his family, but other than his one sister, no one listened to us at first. And even still, that sister was not on board enough to say that it was a Sasquatch. She didn't want to say anything one way or the other. But Scott pinned her down on things that had happened while they were there. But she kept backing off every time they got close to admitting what it must have been. Over the next year and a half, it seemed that all of Scott's siblings suddenly stopped going up to the cabin. Each of them had one reason or another that they really couldn't go up there anymore. But Scott and I both think the reason was about 8 feet tall and hairy. And after a few years of virtually no one using it, the cabin and the land was sold. I have often wondered how things have gone for the new owner. Now, after that trip to the cabin, It really was a long time before I could bring myself to read or find things in books or on the internet about Sasquatch. I didn't even want to say the word. Maybe it was a little bit of a touch of PTSD, but I avoided the entire topic for a very long time. Now, if Scott wanted to talk about it, we would talk about it, but I didn't go seek it out. I didn't want to know any more about what I had faced down that night. I didn't want to know what it was that had trapped me in an outhouse. But one day I decided that I had to know more, and I did know more. And somehow I found podcasts and YouTube. I never know what to believe, though, on the internet. Some of what I read and hear sounds absolutely made up and crazy. But then again, I guess being trapped in an outhouse with a Sasquatch outside and your buddy taking shots at him with a rifle sounds a little crazy too. So I will forgive and look past a lot of crazy that I find on the internet, because I realize how my story probably sounds to other people. And you can say I'm crazy or whatever you like. I don't have anything to prove, but I do have a lot to lose by telling this story. Thank you if you've gone this far with me. Signed, Tom I., Vancouver, British Columbia. All right, Tom. Well, thank you for taking the time to send that in. I don't know about the rest of you, but I was hanging on every word. And I don't think you're crazy, Tom. I really don't. All right, my Sasquatch. Well, that's all I really have for you at this point. I think we'll be getting together again next Tuesday. I'm sorry I had to miss one this week. I've got a lot going on this week. Been a crazy week. I'm sure you all can understand. For those of you that celebrated, I hope you had it. I hope you have a lovely weekend. And until we meet up again, I also need you to remember, absence of proof is not proof of absence. Thanks for listening.